Hello, dear viewers. This is George from Ireland. I'm carrying on my series on the Ulster Troubles. Now, some Irish Republicans prefer to call it Ireland's English Troubles. I think Tim Pat Coogan made that point. So I was in about 1992 when the last video came to an end. I try not to make these much over 10 minutes. So a new Secretary of State for Northern Ireland was appointed, Patrick Mayhew. Now, as has been said, that Northern Ireland was a graveyard of political reputations. It was hard to make any progress. Many people perceive the situation as a zero-sum game. That's to say, nationalists and unionists couldn't both win. Either side would have to make progress at the expense of the other. Now, surely peace is to the benefit of everyone. Now, I suppose some obdurate people wouldn't attain all their goals. John Hume certainly wanted to promote the cause of peace. Ulster Unionists did as well, but they would say that's by the outright defeat of the IRA, the INLA, and indeed the Loyalist terrorist organisations, though they didn't denounce them quite so vociferously. Anyway, Patrick Mayhew was appointed Secretary of State for Northern Ireland in 1992. He served up to 97. Now, it wasn't a popular post because for various reasons. It didn't seem that somebody could really make a reputation for themselves, but there was a high risk of assassination. No Secretary of State was assassinated, though the IRA and INLA were very keen to do so. And former Ulster secretaries had personal protection for the rest of their lives. So one of the significant things that happened under Mayhew is Her Majesty the Queen visited Northern Ireland. It was the 40th anniversary of her accession, and she rarely went there. Hadn't been there since 1977, the Silver Jubilee, if I got that right. And she presented new colours to the UDR, gave a speech saying violence doesn't advance any cause, which is obviously rubbish because it can advance causes, whether it's legal or illegal. Then Mayhew made an important decision. He outlawed the Ulster Defence Association. He'd been killing people and using other cover names such as Ulster Freedom Fighters, but the pretense could be maintained no longer. And the UDA, they'd had an office on the Shankill Road, but they renamed it something different. I think it was like the Shankill Historical Association. Everybody knew what it was. And the Ulster Defence Regiment, which had a very poor reputation in nationalist eyes, was merged with the Royal Irish Rangers. A new regiment was created, the Royal Irish Regiment. So the word Irish was more pleasing to nationalists than Ulster. Anyway, so the Royal Irish Regiment continued the UDR's role insofar as most of them were part-time soldiers doing aid to civil power. And in time, they were eventually sent abroad to operations such as in Bosnia. That was that. The UDR had been 97% Protestant towards the end. And to try and prevent these men fraternising with loyalist terrorists, they'd been forbidden from going to certain pubs, and their senior officers had been brought from more regiments of the line and from officers from Great Britain for the most part. There was a notorious occasion when on the Ormeau Road in the centre of Belfast, some loyalist terrorists went to a bookmaker's and shot dead 5 men, Catholic men. There's a plaque outside saying they were murdered for their faith. And when some Orangemen were walking past that spot later on, a few of them raised their hand, 5 fingers, as in, we killed 5 of you. As Mayhew said, this would have disgraced a tribe of cannibals. Now, incidentally, of all the hundreds of Orangemen who marched past, how many of them did that? I don't know. It might only have been 1. But the trouble is, the Orange Order often seemed to be judged by the worst behaviour of its members. The GAR Valley Road was a controversial place for the Orange Order to march. It's just outside Portadown. And since the mid-80s, the Orange Order had been trying to go there. There was one leg up to this Church of the Resurrection, if I got that right, Church of Ireland, place of worship, and the other leg back. And this had been going on, this march, for, well, my goodness, coming up towards 200 years. It was early 19th century when it started, but the denominational geography of the area have changed, and the GAR Valley Road was almost entirely a Catholic area. There's a railway line that goes over it, and up the hill from the railway line is almost exclusively Catholic, and the other side is almost entirely Protestant. So there have been standoffs, and the RUC have been trying to stop people getting to go. So that was hotly disputed and the RUC had to try and police this, and the Secretary of State had to take their advice. Should he ban this or not? And the trouble is, if the Orange Order didn't get to go down there, loyalist terrorists would attack people, so sometimes it was going to cause less violence just to force the way through than not. And this is the problem, is then the government was having to give in to those who were going to kill more people, which is not what they should be doing. But if the government doesn't do that, then even more people are going to get killed. So the government's in quite a quandary. Now, other things to point out. Mayhew gave an interview to a German journalist saying that people that vote to join the Republic of Ireland, fine, that'll happen. We would do so with pleasure. Handed over to the Republic. And Mayhew realised he made a statement too far, said, no, I take that back, I don't mean that. But anyway, the cat was out of the bag, and Unionists were mortally insulted. And they thought that the UK government was very keen to be shot of them. Anyway, so the casualty figures were down. Only about 50 people a year were being killed. Of course, it's 50 too many. Now, there's some murder rate anywhere in the world, and often that's for ethnic or religious reasons. So Belfast had half the murder rate of Dublin at this time. I know some people in the United States were saying, isn't this conflict monstrous? But Northern Ireland had a considerably lower murder rate than the United States at the time. So the scale of the conflict was hugely exaggerated. But there were armoured Land Rovers for the RUC, and the government took security quite seriously with very high walls around RUC stations and armed soldiers on the street in battle dress. So it would have been a lot higher if it wasn't for that. And helicopters were hovering over the centre of Belfast. There were those Sangars towers along the border in South Armagh and so on. So the loyalist terrorist organisations usually didn't kill that many people. Though they said they were armed to the teeth, the UVF killing about 5 people a year. There was that Graham Bookmakers attack. I think it was the UDA carried out that appalling crime. But the SA was still active at Clonaux in County Tyrone. They killed 3 IRA men, and the IRA commemorate that with a song about it. So Sinn Féin, of course, lamented the death of these people who were armed to the teeth. What do they expect the security forces to do? So Dr. Robin Eames was the Archbishop of Armagh, Church of Ireland man, that's to say Protestant, and he acted as a go-between between the British government and the loyalist terrorists, trying to induce them to call off their campaign of terror. I read some books by Steve Bruce, published in the early 90s, At the Edge of the Union, about unionism and loyalism. And his outlook was very bleak. He asked someone at a loyalist terrorist organisation, what would you do if the IRA said they were immediately ceasing violence? And the loyalist said, we get onto the Northern Ireland office and see what those bastards have offered them. Because they thought that the IRA would only suspend their campaign if they were offered a major concession. And of course, loyalists didn't want any concessions towards Republicans, so they would literally torpedo any negotiations by actually stepping up their campaign of violence. Now, according to the standard reference text on the UVF, some people in the UVF were actually against sectarianism at this time. It beggars belief. But anyway, they were certainly against the IRA and ILA still, entering into behind-the-scenes negotiations. Gusty Spence had long been let out of prison. About 1986, he was let out of prison. And people treat him as though he's some working-class hero. So they did such a tremendous thing by shooting dead these unarmed barmen because they had southern accents and were presumable Catholics. David Irvin was another leading light in the UVF, a generation younger. And Spence had said to his acolytes, if you're prepared to fight and die for Ulster, you should be prepared to stop and think. Irvin said that came across as very arrogant to him, but he did start to think and realise that perhaps they could have some truck with Republicans after all. The staggering thing is the UVF and even the UDA seem to be ahead of the Ulster Unionist Party. The UVF had started out having set its face against even the tiniest concession to nationalist sentiment. There it was, proposing quite major concessions. I suppose they just wanted their jailbirds to be let out of the maze. So the SDLP also entered into clandestine negotiations with the UVF to try to induce them to suspend their campaign of terrorism. So progress was being made in that respect, but this headway was all lost. In October 1993, the IRA set off a bomb in Frizzle's chip shop on the Shankill Road, and they killed 11 people, if I got that right. Thomas Begley was the man who carried the bomb, and I believe he was mentally subnormal, almost tricked into doing it. And the IRA said, oh, we were going to call in a warning, but the bomb had an 11-second fuse, so that's not credible. Others say it was Gusty Spencer were trying to get, as in he was upstairs. But there we are. Jerry Adams carried the coffin of this man, so therefore signalling approval of what he'd done. Others say, well, he needed to do that for the peace process. If he hadn't, he would have lost face amongst the IRA and would not have had the authority to persuade them not to kill anyone for a little while. And the UDA vowed vengeance, and they burst into a pub at Greysteel, County Londonderry, around Halloween, shouting trick or treat, and they shot dead 6 people. So I remember speaking to my school friends about that, and they thought it was the IRA carried out this crime because many people in Great Britain were not clued up with the conflict, and they didn't even realise that loyalist terrorists exists. Of course it would be said on the news that it was the UDA and there were Catholic victims, but some people just did not commute and didn't know about the UDA.